Great, let's jump into it. So now we can see the source, and we begin where we're up to at Sichos HaRan, Kuf Yud Gimel 113. We are about a third of the way through the Sefer, and it's just incredible that we've been taking this journey together for this long, this consistently. Chazdei Hashem, Ashreinu. It's a tremendous zechus and privilege. So Rebbe Nachman over here has a very difficult teaching. It's difficult both because it's difficult to understand what he's actually saying, and we're going to try to interpret it a little bit as humbly and as best as I can. And it's also difficult because the content is challenging, because Rebbe Nachman is speaking over here about a tragedy. And ordinarily, if a person hasn't experienced something difficult, particularly, it's not really right for that person to comment on it in any significant way, because they don't really know what that experience is. So they can speak about it, but always with the preface to the fact that they're just commenting on someone else's experience, not having experienced it personally themselves. Over here, Rebbe Nachman is going to be speaking about a tragic condition and experience that he himself experienced, and that is namely the loss of his wife. The loss of his wife, his becoming a widower. And that's what this teaching is. And he says, Ha'olam Ayrim, the world says that Misha Kodesh Baruch Hu Roitza La'asosei Nar, a person who the Master of Heaven and Earth desires, and we're going to try to interpret this in a minute, wants La'asoso Nar, to turn this person into a Nar, which is a little bit difficult to translate. On the surface, maybe it means youth. Sometimes it has a negative connotation, right? Like in Yiddish, they call it narishkeit, right? So not a Hebrew word, but it comes from the Hebrew word nar, so it means childishness. But nar is a youth, sometimes with negative connotations, like we just mentioned, narishkeit, and Chazal's comment on what it says about Yosef, v'hu nar, that Yosef HaTzadik was a nar, and Chazal say he had childish kinds of behaviors. He was very, at least on that level, whatever it is, but just reading Chazal, he was vain, right? And he focused on externalities and temporalities. He was busy with his hair and different things, right? So that he's called a nar. But on the other hand, nar could also have very positive connotations, which we're going to discuss be'ezras Hashem in a moment. Says Rebbe Nachman, somebody that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to make this person into a nar, hu lokeach ishto mimenu. Hashem, chas v'shalom, we should never hear from such a thing. Hashem will take his wife away. So what does this have to do with nar? What's the depth of that? Says Rebbe Nachman, ki isha kshera, because a proper wife, a proper woman, a holy wife, the way that a person is supposed to be, hi bechinas is an aspect of the pasuk in Mishlei, eishes chayil ateres bala. She is the crowning glory of her husband. It's such a beautiful, wonderful pasuk. Right? That's what a Jewish wife is. She's a crown with all of the connotation. Should be treasured like a crown. Should be recognized as the crowning glory of her husband. Eishes chayil ateres bala. The Eishes chayil, the woman of valor, is ateres bala, is the crowning glory of her husband. But there's another pasuk about a crown. And this other pasuk about a crown is an eicha. And we read this on Tisha B'Av, and the pasuk says, Nafla ateres rishenu. The crown has fallen off of our heads. Nafla ateres rishenu. That crown has fallen off. So says Rebbe Nachman that ukeshemesa chas v'shalom, that if a person loses his wife, which again Rebbe Nachman at a young age lost his first wife, eventually remarried at the end of his life, that he knew what that pain was. So chas v'shalom, when a person loses his eishes chayil ateres bala, that crown, hu bechinas, that's the aspect of the pasuk in Eicha that we just mentioned, nafla ateres rishenu, that a person's crown fell off of his head. Says Rebbe Nachman, the Rashi Tevos, the opening letters of these three words, nafla ateres roshenu, fallen from our head is the crown, spells the word nar. Nafla ateres roshenu. Cryptic teaching, doesn't have any commentary, doesn't really explain what it is. Let's try to unpack this a little bit if we can, to the best of our capacity. And so we mentioned before that the word nar generally, oftentimes, has a negative connotation. Narishkeit v'hu nar, that Yosef HaTzadik had certain nar-like, child-like tendencies. But in other contexts, the word nar is a very beautiful thing, a very positive thing. Because the Sfarim HaKadoshim say, and I brought this in my book, The Story of Our Lives, in a footnote, the Sfarim HaKadoshim say that when Yehuda was saying, I think to Yosef, Eich ele el avi, how can I go back to my father? V'hanar einenu iti. Without the nar, which of course in that context is a reference to Binyamin. Now there was a whole back and forth, and Yaakov Avinu was even willing to sort of forfeit Shimon and to hang out in Eretz Yisrael and say, you're just not going back to take Binyamin. You can't take Binyamin down to Eretz Yisrael, to Mitzrayim. You can't bring him to Yosef. And eventually Yehuda convinced his father. They were starving. There was a famine. And he brings Binyamin back. And the whole thing, he plants the goblet of Binyamin's bag. And they all say, okay, we'll all be your avadim, but let the child go. And Yosef HaTzadik says, no, Binyamin will stay here. And this is the penultimate moment, or the ultimate moment, as I actually learned this Shabbos afternoon, that the word ultimate is the final and penultimate is second to final. I did not know that. So please forgive any misuse of that word penultimate in anything I've ever written, because I thought it just was a fancier way of saying ultimate. But you live and you learn, Baruch Hashem. In this ultimate moment, Yehuda tells Yosef, I can't do that. I can't leave Binyamin here and go back to Yaakov Avinu. Ki eich ele el avi. How can I rise up, ascend, right, from Mitzrayim, which is in the south, to ascend to Eretz Canaan, to ascend to Eretz Yisrael? V'hanar, with Binyamin, einenu iti, is not with me. And the Sfarim HaKadoshim say that this is true on a simple level. Of course, it's Yehuda speaking to Yosef about Binyamin and making reference to Yaakov Avinu. That's for sure true. But because Torah is true on varying levels, Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod, Razin, Derazin, the secrets of secrets, says that Tzadikim, I'm forgetting exactly which sefer I saw this in, but it's definitely a Torah that's brought down by Tzadikim. It could be in a number of Svarim, and I remember seeing it in one particular sefer. He says what it's actually speaking about is each and every one of us reflecting and ruminating on the prospect of us returning El Avi to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the Master of the world, after 120 years. And we have to ask ourselves, Eich ele El Avi, how am I going to return to the Master of heaven and earth? V'hanar einenu iti. What's the nar in this context? In this context, nar doesn't mean childish. It means childlike. All of the glorious, glowing, beautiful aspects of childhood, wonder, innocence, humility, recognition of dependency upon others. That's what it means to be a child. Children don't have this sense of sufficiency. No matter how proud, and strutting around, an 8-year-old, 9-year-old is proud of one thing or another, at the end of the day, he knows with a little bit of reflection that he can't survive. He can't survive on his own. They can't survive on their own. Children are dependent, and they recognize their lives as being in the hands of someone else. There's a tremendous humility to youth. There's a tremendous purity and innocence to youth. And so we're asking ourselves, how am I going to come back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chas v'Shalom, having lost the nar? V'hanar, that childlike nature, einenu iti, Chas v'Shalom, having lost that. Eich ele el avi. How can I rise back up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu if I'm not focused on rekindling that fire, that passion, that flame of youth, which is symbolized in my humble book, The Story of Our Lives, in the princess, right, that gets lost as we take the journey, like we say in chapter 1, from childhood to adulthood, and we become more sophisticated, and we become more settled into the nature of Olam Hazeh, and in the process we lose something very precious. We lose the princess. And so how can I return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu without that? How can I rediscover that? Which is the whole journey of the second in command in that book, right? In the story of the lost princess, the viceroy who devotes his whole life to reclaiming this special spirit of the princess. So in that context, nar is a very good thing. Nar is a very wonderful thing. And so if we read nar with that mindset, then this sentence changes. Because if you read it on the surface, it just says, okay, somebody that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to turn into a child again, takes his wife away from him. Like maybe it's a punishment, maybe, I don't know, it's just an arbitrary reason. It doesn't say why, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to destroy somebody's life and turn him into a nar. As a consequence for one thing or another, he takes his wife away because a wife is an aspect of Eishes Chayla Teres Bala. Chas v'sholom, losing a wife is Nafla Teres Rishenu, the crown of our head has fallen down, and that's Rosh Hashanah nar. Okay. Chas v'sholom, we should never hear from such a thing. But based on this interpretation of the word nar, the whole thing changes. Because the more that a person rises into emunah, even in the most unimaginable circumstances that none of us should ever have to experience anything akin to this, the more a person rises into emunah, like Yosef HaTzadik, who the brothers thought they had sold him down the river, essentially down into Egypt, and Yosef says, no. Last week's Parsha, it's a reiteration of what he said in 2 weeks ago Parsha, in 2 weeks ago's Parsha, that you think that you messed up. You think this whole thing was a mistake. That if only you had never sold me. If only that hadn't happened. And what you don't realize from the standpoint of emunah, of faith, that kol mada abed rachmana, in some sense, not like we define tav of it, like it's good. It's not good like an ice cream. It's not good like a sunny day. It's not. But in some sense, letav avid. In some sense, there's a purpose. In some sense, there's ultimate meaning that fits into a grand meta structure of goodness in an ultimate sense. Yosef HaTzadik tells the brothers, I didn't just end up here b'diavad, like I happened to have been sold here. I was sent here to live in that consciousness of emunah, that everything that I experience, I was sent into that experience. So from that standpoint, Rebbe Nachman is telling us a very deep secret. Even in the darkest of moments that we can't even imagine, again, I can't even comment, chas v'shalom, lo yaleinu, lo yaleichem, we should never hear from such a thing. But we still have emunah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in every circumstance. Gam zu l'toiva, that there's always a silver lining, always. That's our emunah, ve'emunas chabaleilos, we speak about so often, that specifically in the darkness, specifically when everything is falling apart, specifically there a person is able to turn on the emunah engine, and a person is able to allow that to transform their experience. Why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu be doing this not to a person but for a person? Says the Rebbe La'asoisei nar. Because life is a curriculum. And when a person experiences loss, and a person experiences tragedy, lo yaleinu, there is a benefit in some very, very deep, subliminal way that's almost impossible to say, chas v'shalom, for fear of minimizing a person's pain. There is some layer of potential positivity that we don't expect them to tap into in that moment, but it could be in reflecting as they're healing and after they've grieved and after they've mourned and etc. Looking back, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes a person and la'asoisei nar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes a person and HaKadosh Baruch Hu reintroduces them to their childlike nature, to that part of them that might have fallen asleep to the way in which that they are not in control of their life, that they are not reliant on anybody else. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu reintroduces them to that point where they recognize, I'm just a nar, dealing with existential loneliness, loss. A person becomes a little bit softer. A person becomes a little bit more sensitive, more vulnerable, more authentic. Because when life is chugging steadily along and everything is going according to plan, which means according to our plan, according to my plan and our plan, so then that's where the danger is of losing this holy narishkeit, but in a holy way, this childlike nature of the princess. And sometimes people go through things. This is one example of that. And Rebbe Nachman finds a remez in Nafla Ateres Roshenu Rosh Tevis Nar, because the Ateres Roshenu is Eishes Chayil Ateres Bala that gets lost, and a person becomes a nar again. But it can be true in many, many, many ways. A person loses a job, they become a little bit of a nar. In a holy way, in a good way, you understand? Chas v'shalom, a person loses, we shouldn't say even out of our mouths these things. Nobody should lose anything ever. But when life happens to a person, which almost invariably it does to each and every one of us on one level or another, Hashem should protect all of us, says the Rebbe, you don't just happen to be in that situation. God is not doing something to you. Really, God is doing it for you. Yosef tells the brothers, Ki lemichya shlachani, I was sent to this place, and I wasn't just sent here arbitrarily, and I believe that there's some purpose. I can tell you why I was sent here, to keep you guys alive, and to bring life to a whole country. I was sent. So the Rebbe says loss is a function of this, that Misha HaKadosh Baruch Hu roitza la'asosay nar. Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu knows that for this person's tikkun, on whatever level, and obviously it has to fit, like the Pele Yoyet says fascinatingly, that it's not just a person dies, so Hashem makes a cheshbon on that person, whether that person should have lived, or chas v'shalom, it was time for them to leave the world. Hashem takes into account all of the other aspects of what this is going to impact the person's loved ones. The inconvenience on some very low level, right, very basic level, that might cause to whatever structure of what role that person played, etc., etc. It's all taken into cheshbon. It's all taken into cheshbon. And so it's not like wives are like pawns over here, to affect their husband's spirituality, so God will take them away. Obviously not, right? It's all a cheshbon. It's part of a grand, almost algorithm of benefit, ultimate benefit to every party involved, not the least of which is Hashem. And certainly to our souls, which are eternal, and are only in this world just for a few minutes, 120 years, it's nothing. We wander in this lifetime, we try the best that we can to do what we were sent here to do, which is to hold on to Emunah despite everything. One of the pillars of Emunah is this realization that Kol Ma Da'avid Rachmana is Letav Avid, and how can we reframe the loss of someone dear to us? Chas v'shalom, a parent, chas v'shalom, in all these relationships, is to realize La'asosay nar, that a person becomes a little bit more childlike. We just started this morning here in London, in our shul Kal Yedidim. We just started a new morning koilel. Shachris is at 7 o'clock, and we had a big Malava Malka to advertise it. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it in a minute. And it starts at 6:15. It goes until 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock is Shachris. This morning was the very first. And Baruch Hashem, I started a chabura going through Likutei Moharan, starting from the very beginning. So today was just a hakdama. Of course, all the shiurim are going to be recorded. It's already online. It's on the YouTube channel. We're going to get it onto the other platforms, Be'ezus Hashem, as soon as we can, hopefully today. And the opportunity to really journey through Rebbe Nachman's Sefer day after day, page after page. I've never done anything like this before. Most of my shiurim are weekly, monthly, so you can only accomplish so much. Baruch Hashem, we've covered a lot of ground, but imagine if we were doing Sichos HaRan daily, we could have, would have been done much quicker. But it's good. But a daily series is a completely different thing. And this koilel is part of a network of koilelim. It's just one particular learning program in our shul, but they have these all over the world, I believe in more than 60 locations now. They have here in the UK already in Golders Green, in Gateshead, in Manchester, so we're the first one in our area is called Hendon, and so we started one in our shul, but it began in America in Lakewood. And it's called Koilel Ar Shmuel. Koilel Ar Shmuel. That's what it's called. It began in a base medrash called Lutsk, which I think now has, and I think Shimon might know a little bit more, maybe if he knows about it. I think, is it true that there are hundreds of people learning, every morning? Hundreds of people. Koilel Ar Shmuel. Okay, so I heard about this idea. It's a beautiful thing. Beautiful. They want me to give a chabura. Had to make a cheshbon, a calculation. Should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? How's it going to impact my day? I decided, what an opportunity. Let's do it. But I didn't know who Shmuel was. It's called Ar Shmuel, the light of Shmuel. I didn't know who Shmuel was. And after Malava Malka, they played a video explaining how the koilel came about. It's a relatively new program over the last 5 years or so, I think, something like that. And it came about because there was a family in Lakewood, young family, a young father and mother, who in a car accident, Nebuch, lost their 5-year-old boy. His name is Shmuel. And in the videos, the most beautiful, beautiful footage of this little sweet kid, mamish, gorgeous kid, just sweet like sugar, just glowing, shining little boy, mamish shining. And the father went to some gedolim, and he was encouraged. Learning is the greatest nechama. Just spend time with Hashem, spend time with His wisdom. He decided he wanted to do more than that, and he contacted a friend, and they founded this koilel. One program in one shul that now a few years later is in over 60 locations and however many countries, but it's here in the UK as well. Koilel Ar Shmuel, the light of that sweet little boy, the light of that neshama. Why am I telling you all of this? Because it is absolutely clear to me, and I don't know him, but you can tell from the video that father of this little boy Shmuel, Zichrono Livracha, is a different caliber person, having experienced what he experienced and pushed through what he pushed through and triumphed over what he triumphed. You could see it on his face. You could hear it in his tone of voice. This is a person that HaKadosh Baruch Hu writes Allah Soisei Nar. I'm sure he was a big tzaddik before that also. I'm sure he was devoted to his learning. I'm sure. This is a person that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reached his hand into this person's life. Ba'ashkacha pratis ad l'ma'od, which Rebbe Nachman makes reference to later in the Sefer, and we'll get there in the 300s, I think. In the 200s later on, but it's later in the Sefer. With tremendous hashkacha pratis, HaKadosh Baruch Hu manifested in that person's life, and they experienced a tragedy that we should never hear from such a thing. Hashem Yishmar, Aleinu, and Be'ez Hashem Tchias HaMesim, they'll be dancing with Shmuel again, and with all the hundreds of thousands of hours of Torah study that this boy Shmuel now has on his shoulders for an eternal schus and aliyas neshama. But you could tell that he was kissed on the forehead. He was kissed on the forehead with this, because he's a different person. And his goals are different. Again, I don't know him, but I could tell. And his passion is in a different place. And we don't wish it upon anybody. And Be'ezras Hashem, Mumacha Hashem, Dima Me'al Kol Panim, we should never hear anything on any level anywhere near this. But Rabbi Nachman earned the right to talk about this because he lost 4 children. One of whom he thought was going to be Mashiach. Can't imagine where Rabbi Nachman drew these souls down. He named the boy Shlomo Ephraim. Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef. He mamish believed that this boy was Mashiach. He lost 4 children. He lost his first wife. This is a person who knew what loss is. I could never say it. Rabbi Nachman knew what loss is. And the tzaddik is telling us, we can't just speak talk the talk of emunah. And then when things fall apart, it's forget it, it's irrelevant. No, then it wasn't real. Emunah is relevant specifically in the situations where you need it the most. Baleilos, baleilos, ve'emunascha baleilos. And if a person is honest and they utilize whatever opportunity is being given to them in a moment of chas v'shalom, when things are falling apart, says the Rebbe, it's possible that HaKadosh Baruch Hu roitzel hasoisenar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not doing this to you in some mysterious sense. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing this for you. And in the case of this sweet boy Shmuel and his holy family and this incredible program, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing that for the whole Klal Yisrael. The whole Klal Yisrael. Does it outweigh the pain? Not in a million years. Does it do away with the sorrow? Not an iota. But we hold this paradox as Jews, Hazar and Bedima Berina, with tears and with joy and with tears. And Sichos HaRan Kuf Yud Gimel gives us a little bit of a mahalech as to how to deal with this. As Hashem, we shouldn't hear anything like this. It's it's a challenging teaching, but this is Sichos HaRan Kuf Yud Gimel. Okay, let's take a look at Sichos HaRan Kuf Yud Daled as we move into the second half of the shiur b'siyata d'shmaya. Here the Rebbe says an interesting thing. Achshav, Rebbe Nachman says, now, b'nakel yoser lamed b'nisayon. In our generations, it is in a sense easier to withstand a nisayon, to withstand a challenge. Even though our challenges are much stronger than they had in previous generations, the nisyonos are much more, as we're going to learn, much more difficult. We developed in such a way that we have more strength to be able, if we choose, to be omed b'nisayon. Because everything Hashem does is in a system of balances. Zeh l'uma, zeh asa l'kim. Hashem always creates all of nature and the entire world in a system of parallel balances. So that if the Yetzer Hara gets that much stronger, we develop that much stronger of a capacity to choose properly and to be omed b'nisayon. Because this taiva, which he's speaking about, the taiva for immorality, promiscuousness, because that has already been grappled with by great tzaddikim throughout history, they've already broken, so to speak, the klipa. They've already weakened the wall in such a way that for us, it's a little bit easier. Certainly easier than it would be dealing with the challenges that we're dealing with today if they hadn't gone through that process of preparing things so that we can do what we need to do. Ad sha'achshav, because this has been going on for generations and generations, bekal yichadam lamed b'nisayon, it is very easy now. Very easy. It's very difficult, extremely difficult, but it is possible. You can have even a simple person that without this process of this having been made easier for them, it would have been impossible. Sometimes you can have even a totally simple person who can be miskaber. You have stories like this, simple people who can be miskaber. Says Rebbe Nachman, this is the secret meaning of the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which says, Takve shel Yosef an v'sanusa shel Boaz. The strength of Yosef was an v'sanusa shel Boaz, was a small thing for what Boaz dealt with. The Takve shel Boaz an v'sanusa shel Palti ben Laish. And the strength that Boaz showed was the an v'sanusa, was a simple thing for Palti ben Laish. And of course we're speaking here about their nisyonos in this area of struggle. Yosef with Eshes Potifar, Boaz with Rus, and Palti ben Laish with Michal bas Shaul. These three tzaddikim had to struggle in this area of immorality, and the nisayon became progressively harder, right, throughout the generations. Yosef and Eshes Potifar was one level. Boaz and Rus, as the Gemara explains, is on a much different level. Palti ben Laish, even more. I mean, they were mamish married, and they didn't consummate their marriage because of the complication with David HaMelech. Unbelievable. Says Rebbe Nachman, he explains, Ki toikev hanisayon shel Yosef HaTzadik, because Yosef HaTzadik was oimed b'nisayon, he withstood the challenge with Eshes Potifar. That caused that later on in history, it would have been simple for Boaz to overcome that. That wouldn't even have been a challenge, because that challenge was already overcome by Yosef HaTzadik. And the same thing is true later on in history for Palti ben Laish, based on what Boaz went through. That would have been very, very simple for Palti ben Laish, who had a much more difficult nisayon and had to deal with it. But because Boaz had already withstood that challenge with Rus, that had an effect on the whole world. That if Palti ben Laish would have been in that situation, wouldn't have even been a challenge for him at all. Because later on in history, things are easier. So even though, again, the nisayon gets harder and it's adjusted relatively speaking, so in a sense it gets easier, but it also gets more difficult. But ultimately, today, in most of our nisyonos, we have the strength to do it. We do have the strength to do it. Afilu ish pashad lagamri. Even if a person is simple, we have it in our DNA as part of this holy nation. That Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh, that all of Am Yisrael are intertwined, are Arevim, they're guarantors one for the other, and that everything that one person does in the nation affects spiritually the whole entire nation. We are of the collective soul of Yosef HaTzadik. We have mixed into our spiritual DNA the impact of Boaz and the impact of Palti ben Laish. Therefore, says Rebbe Nachman, afilu ish pashut legamri. Now, along with that theme, and this should say 115, not 114, this is Kuf Tesavav. Rebbe Nachman continues this theme, and he says the following. And if he said this in his time, which was over 300 years ago now, or around 300 years ago, it is certainly true about our time. I mean, in an infinite way. Says Rebbe Nachman, Ikar hanisayon shel kol adam ba'olam hazeh, the primary challenge, and this is truer of men than of women, okay? But it is also true, and it applies to both, and it's also true in many facets and angles and aspects. It doesn't have to be mamish, the same thing. But the primary challenge of a person ba'olam hazeh, who b'taiva hazeh shel niyaf, is of this aspect of adultery with everything that contains, immorality. That's the primary nisayon that a person has to deal with in this world. Va'afilu taivas mammon, and even the yearning and the desire for wealth, afal pishi taiva guru ma'od, even though if a person's stuck in that and they devote their whole lives to trying to accumulate more money and more property, and that's their main thing, it's very, very, very grua, it's very low, and it's very coarse. The avodah zara mamish, and it's literally like serving avodah zara. Because a person literally is avoda zara, right? They're working for what purpose? Not for the purpose of kedusha, but for a zara, for a foreign purpose, to enrich themselves and their experience in this transient, fleeting world. So it's true that taivas mammon it's not a good thing, but afalpikin ikra nisayon b'taiva hazois. The truth is that the primary challenge that a person has in this world is with this taiva of immorality. Both for the men, for the women, it's different aspects. The women have the aspect of tznius, whatever it is, right? However it's relevant to each of us in our own lives, as we're going to see now from Rebbe Nachman, there are myriad, millions of levels and layers and madregas, but generally speaking, this is really it. That's why in Kabbalah, this area of Avodas Hashem is called Yesod. Yesod means the foundation. It's the foundation of everything. It's the primary, like sort of boxing ring. This is the arena. Everything happens around this issue. And I happen to think, again, Shimon, you got to mark this down. This is another incredible synchronicity, because of course yesterday is the beginning of Shovavim, right? Is the beginning of a 6-week period, that according to the Mekubalim is very opportune for working on this area. Each person in their own madrega, making an extra effort, shmiras einayim, shmiras haBris on every level. These are the weeks. And so how beautiful that our Sichos HaRan shiur, right in the beginning of Shavavim, is going to, of course, be speaking about this issue. So this is what it is. This is the primary nisayon of each person in this world. Now let's take a look at, this is a teaching from Rebbe Nachman in Likutei Halachos. It's a little bit lengthy. Let's try to get through as much of it as we can get through, and that will have to suffice. Says Rebbe Nachman in Likutei Halachos Hilchos Kedushin, Gimel, Ois Gimel. And the tzaddik says as follows: Va'agav shanu ois be'inin zeh. Once we're speaking about this topic, Amarti levar mashinir lanias daiti be'inin zeh shel shtei atayvos harois halalu. Once we're speaking about these two desires, the desire for immorality and the desire for money, for wealth, he says, let me explain to you a little bit about these two things. Taivas niyaf and taivas mammon, she'eim heim ha'ikra hamatridin is roiv ha'olam eshnei ha'olam. These are the two things that drive people away from both worlds. Forget about that the person will lose their olam haba, whatever that is. A person's not amassing, eternal riches in investing in spirituality, but they'll even lose olam hazeh. They'll destroy a person's life, one way or another. Taivas mammon, taivas niyaf. These two things. The common nefashis nishku b'hem, are so many people who are sunk into them. They didn't even try to break free, and that's going to become a very important factor. Sometimes you think about shmiras haBris means to be perfect, right, in that area, and we're going to see from Rebbe Nachman that's not true. Obviously, that's a level of shmiras haBris, but it's a huge spectrum. So Rebbe Nachman is speaking over here not just about people who are perfect tzaddikim, who can say that they're a perfect tzaddik, but people who are trying, right, who are mishtadel, that they're be'etzem shomer haBris. Okay, they could slip from time to time, but their whole life is focused on this and succeeding to the extent that they can. And here Rebbe Nachman asks a question, a stira in the words of Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman says, I have a stira. It seems to be a contradiction in two things that Rabbi Nachman said. In many places throughout Likutei HaRan and over here in Sichos HaRan, Kasav, Rabbi Nachman writes that the primary nisayon of a person in this world is the taiva of niyuf. That's the main thing, is this attraction, this lust for adultery, for immorality. This is the main thing that's pushing against a person, that a person has to contend with. This is it. This is the main cleansing and the main clarification process of a soul that comes into this world, is tested with this. In Yiskalam ibn Nisayon zeh, will a person be able to withstand this nisayon, l'shabar taivazois, to the best of that person's capacity, to break this desire, that through this a person can merit the hidden goodness, and then a person will access the greatness and the honor of God's great godliness and His exaltedness. And it will be revealed to that person all the secrets of Torah, the secrets of life. Because it's impossible to fully come to awareness of Hashem's greatness with absolute experiential knowledge without shmiras haBris, without the holiness of the covenant, which is this area of one's life. Like Rabbi Nachman says in many places, I mean, it starts from Tchila B'Galus HaTaiva Hazois, which is amazing, right? Because it doesn't say that you can't come to a knowledge of a Kodesh Baruch Hu without being perfect in this area, because that's not the point. The point is that you need to go through the struggle of this area, the ups and the downs and the challenges and the shame and the despair and the trying again and etc. The process is what cleanses. And then when a person sticks at it enough, then Kate Sam L'Chayshech, the Medrash says, Mikate. eventually a person breaks free. Eventually a person evolves. So keep in mind, it is specifically being tested and clarified. Tchila begalus hatayva hazos, being exiled into this experience of this challenge, and then being able to find the fortitude not to give up. That was Rebbe Nachman's whole thing, right? Ein shem yish ba'olam klal, never to give up, never ever to give up, to start again and again a million times. You don't think that that's called shmiras haBris? Of course it is. That's kedushas haBris. It's to start a million times and never to give up and never to stop trying and to put in the best efforts and to put the best filters and to try. That's the sweetness. That's the sweetness of closeness to Hashem. That a person cannot access the sweetness and pleasantness of Hashem. Again, kiyam ayidei shmiras, kiyam ayidei shmiras haBris, v'b'chinas u'mibesari echse Eloka, that I will come to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu through my basar, through my flesh, cleansing that area of the flesh. Shal tikkun haBris sheb'chinas besar kodesh, that our bodies become holy. Through that, a person is able to access closeness and visions of godliness. To come to really live life with an experiential emunah, tzadik be'emunasa yichya. In another Torah, many different teachings. Siman Yud Tes, Vatar Amada Azal Minsav, and Siman Chav Tes, Bevor Ba'arichas Niflar. Rebbe Nachman keeps on saying the same thing. That was his main thing. She'ikra Skarvis Yisrael Avim Shabbat Shamayim, that the main coming close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu Alidei Tikkun haBris is this main thing, the foundation, the Yesod. Shal Yidei Zeh Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'am. This is why we're different from all the other nations, and the mark that we have isn't just sort of arbitrary. That Kadosh Baruch Hu could have made a mark on any part of our body. It's the bris, right? That's what it means to be a Jew, is to have a bris. That's what demarcates us. We're a nation of bris people, right? We're a nation of people that are committed to a covenant of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and that covenant is the opposite of adultery on every level. Meaning we're not just running around all over the place, right, looking for physical gratification. We're here for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and for that relationship. That's called a bris. Shmiras haBris, to guard that covenant. That's the primary closeness to Hashem. In all of Rebbe Nachman's teachings, almost in all of them, mevor zais, this is what's clarified. She'ikar kedusha u'shmiras haBris. This is the thing to focus on. This is why so many people find Rebbe Nachman, because they struggle in this area to one degree or another degree, and Rebbe Nachman's giving them strength to not to give up. That's really why Rebbe Nachman speaks to our generation more than almost anyone else, because this is what our generation is struggling with. This is what we're struggling with. And we need all the encouragement we can get. We need all the strength we can get. We need all the clarification that, on the contrary, no matter what you're going through, start again. Hischadshus, never to give up. That's Rebbe Nachman's message. And in all the holy works that are drawn on the teaching of Kabbalah, which are called the Svarim HaKadoshim, they're drawn from that realm of Kedusha. They're all speaking about this, that this is the main holiness. So Befrat B'Sifrei HaZohar, HaKadosh V'Tikkunim, specifically in the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Yosem Zeb Dibrei Manu Rabbeinu Zechron Levracha, Kama Sichos Niflois Be'inin Zeb Rabbi Nachman said even much more than that. And he's denigrating this connection to this taiva, and to really, we should try to work on it. As has been printed in his works. Nimsa, says Rabbi Nachman, I think by now we've conclusively proven that Rabbi Nachman believes that the most important thing and the greatest challenge is this taiva of niyaf, of adultery / immorality / physical gratification on every level. But then, v'achar kol eile, but after a person has come to recognize this is what Rebbe Nachman says is the most important thing, you open up Sipurim Maisias, which is the collection of Rebbe Nachman's original story tales, which are a miraculous gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to the Jewish people. Most people don't know about. Highly encouraged if you can get your hands on the translation of these stories. It was translated by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. It's called Rebbe Nachman's Stories. Even if you don't understand any part of them, just to read them, Rebbe Nachman says, is cleaning out our neshama. Cleaning out the neshama. Just to read it, even if you don't understand any part of the story. Highly, highly encouraged, if you don't already have it, to try to pick up a copy, whether in Lashon HaKodesh or whether in the translation. But if you open up Sipurei Maasiyos to the story of the Baal Tefillah, which I believe is the 9th story, I could be wrong, but it's the story of the Master of Prayer. Sham Mivur, in that story, it seems clear, Shetavas Mammon Ugura Oid Yosra Afilu Mitavas Niyaf, that actually, Taivas Mammon, a person who's extricated in trying to make as much money as they possibly can, that's much worse than the taiva for niyaf. Kamavur shama shekiblu man hamelech shemikol ha-taiva shebalu mechalim lahotzias mishanafal l'sham chutz mitavas mammon. They, which is not getting to the whole story now, but the group of people that were around the king, the warrior, and the person who was articulate, and all the different people that were around the king, the king's men, had a tradition from the king that you're able to free every kind of person, except a person that has fallen in to this Yetzer Hara of Mammon. That a person who fell into that they've devoted their whole life, that's mamish how they define themselves, that by their occupation and how much money they have in the bank account, and that's, they're always after the next thing, physically speaking, on a financial level, on a thing, property level. Such a person, that in the story, the only way to get those people free and to heal those people is by taking them on the path which is the path of the sword in the story, without getting into that now, where the Gibor, where the king's mighty one receives his Gvura. So Ayin Sham. So says Rebbe Nachman, we see from there, move on Sham, so it appears, that in that story it seems that it's easier to get a person out of Taivas Niyov than to get a person out from Taivas Mammon. Says Rebbe Nachman, so which one is it? How could it be that throughout his writings, Rebbe Nachman saying the worst thing is the Yetzer Hara for Niyuf, that's our main nisayon, and that's the most difficult. But then in the story of the Baal Tefillah, it would appear to imply that Taivas Mammon is a much more difficult Yetzer Hara to contend with. So Rebbe Nachman explains, Ach be'emes hakol naicha. Says Rebbe Nachman, no, it's all okay. These two things are not contradictory, and he says, I'll explain to you why. Ki bevadai, without a question, ikra nisayon v'abechira shal adam min urav v'taivas niyaf shabar ba'adam min urav. There's no question about it that the primary struggle and the primary wrestling match that exists between Yaakov Avinu, who is the emblematic Jew, with the Sari Shal Esav, which is of course the Satan, the Malach HaMavos, the Yetzer Hara. There's no question that is all about the taiva for immorality, which is already in a person from their youth. There's no question about that. And a person has to have mercy on themselves in this world and in the next world to try their best to overcome this challenge. This is why we're in this world. And then the person will benefit and will merit what they merit. Ashri life. Fortunate is that person. Even if a person isn't able to be the perfect tzaddik to reach every madrig on this level, at least let the person try their very best. That mamish, just the act itself, so to speak, this is more relevant for men, that a person should be very, very careful in that area to the best of their capacity, al kolpanim. And that's one level, but there are layers and layers and layers and levels of Kedusha and Precious and so on. Because a person has to try to sanctify themselves on every level, and this is the main thing. Kedusha, this is where holiness is, or the opposite. Anytime a person puts another blockage and a person's putting another thing on the filter to make it all that less likely that they have access, etc., etc., in every aspect, you find holiness there. That's shmiras haBris. That a person needs to be so careful. And he says specifically in our generations, and he was speaking about his time, all the more so about ours, right? And this is the nisayon of our dar. How many battles it takes for a person to get a little bit further along the road of actually being able to guard this area of his life. And it takes tremendous encouragement. And how many prayers and how many begging HaKadosh Baruch Hu that a person should be free. And how much coming close to tzaddikim it takes. And holy pieces of advice, and how much it takes for a person to throw themselves into the ocean of connection to Hashem through Torah and tefillah and mitzvahs, and even then kulei hai v'ulai. Maybe maybe then they'll be privileged to be free. Even if a person is not on the holiest level, but at least they're trying to stay away from Averis, that's called shmiras haBris. They're a person that's nishmer me'averis. They get up in the morning trying their best to stay away from Averis. That's called shmiras haBris. That's what Shovavim is all about. It's not about being perfect. Nobody's perfect, but it's about being a person that's renewing our interest and our passion and our focus and our willingness and our yearning and our desire to be just a little bit holier. That's called shmiras haBris. Like it says in Rebbe Nachman, it's in Yud Aleph, etc. Skipping the next paragraph just because we don't have so much time left. Nachsoli inyanenu. So from all of this, it seems she'ikar nisayona adam u'b'tay b'zayshal mishkal. This is the primary nisayon. There's no question about it because it's in us from a young age. Says Rebbe Nachman, but you know what can happen? But a person who's stuck in that taiva and is not constantly clawing his way out of it and trying to find a way through all the aforementioned different, eitzahs, pieces of advice that a person should be free. Says Rebbe Nachman, what can happen is that after a person has wandered a bit too far down that road and has let themselves slip and isn't trying anymore and isn't succeeding, so then a person can fall from there into taivas mammon, which comes a little bit later on in life. Maybe after the taiva, the Yetzer Hara for this is not so strong anymore, there are other Yetzer Haras. And a person who hasn't been working on this area, a lot of times what can happen is it transfers and they get captured into the taiva of mammon. That's called a bar ein mayim boy. That's called the pit that doesn't have water in it. She actually not misham ki im aidei shmiras haBris v'bechinas gam at v'dam brisech shalachti asirach mibar ein mayim boy. It's a pasuk that v'dam brisech shalachti asirach mibar. It's only through the bris that a person can get out of that bar. Kamavur, that's what Rebbe Nachman speaks about. Torah Samach Gimel, I believe it is, Tivisu Tzadek. So when a person slips and falls into taivas mammon, then it's really difficult because that's a lifestyle. That's already a lifestyle. How to get a person who that's the way they think, that's the way they function, that's the way, and to help a person reorient their lives entirely, incredibly challenging. And that's what we said earlier from Rabbi Nachman in the story of the Baal Tefillah. It is so incredibly difficult to get a person out of that who's stuck in with the Yetzer Hara of Mammon. We can pull people out of all different kinds of Yetzer Haras chutz mitavas zais shal Mammon, except from this taiva of money. So says Rebbe Nachman, yes, in this aspect, garua taivas mammon game taivas niyah. The taiva for money is in this sense even worse than the taiva for niyah, because while taivas niyah is the main thing, the primary ikr nisayon, But from Tavas Niyaf, a person can fall into Tavas Mammon, and getting a person out of Tavas Mammon is no simple feat. Ki Tavas Mammon hi ikra nefila shal adam shabala al yedei Tavas Niyaf. That's the primary nefila, that a person becomes so physicality oriented, where it isn't just about physical gratification on one-off peak experiences, which every person can understand. There's a dopamine rush and so on. But when it becomes a shita, when it becomes a mahalach hachayim, when it becomes something that the person, him or herself, isn't even experiencing on a visceral, personal, physical level, but it becomes in sort of an identity, that's a whole different level. That's a whole different level. A person who is not succeeding with Tavas Niyaf and isn't even trying, like we said, so he isn't a shiur haBris on any level, it can be that he falls into Tavas Mammon, Avera Gereres Avera, and when he doesn't do tshuva, then a person can fall into a terrible place. And then it's very difficult to get out. Rebbe Nachman ends, just skip to the end. He says the only way that you can get out, and that's Rebbe Nachman alludes to in the story of the Baal Tefillah, which is the pathway of the sword, where the Gibar in the story, where the warrior went to get his Gibar, which is what? It's just you have to get close to the tzaddik who knew about this derech, because he was the one who told us about this derech, which is Rabbi Nachman, of course, who's telling us the story of the Gibar. The Rebbe Nachman can extricate a person. Not in a metaphysical sense. We spoke about that last week. The tzaddik doesn't make life easier. The tzaddik gives you the advice and the encouragement and wakes a person up on such a level that a person can be free even from this taiva. Hashem should bless us, be'ezras Hashem, in this Shovavim, to take stock of this, each and every one of us on our own level, the men on their level, the women on their level. Everybody has something that they can do to improve, to be strong, and to start again, no matter what's going on in your life until this point. Now's the time, and I'm giving myself encouragement, I'm saying you, I mean me, now's the time that be'ezras Hashem, we should have 6 weeks full of hischadshus, renewal, hope, tefillah, encouragement in this area, that we should be successful to bring kedusha into our lives on the level chas v'shalom of Tavas Niyaf, but certainly on the level of Tavas Mammon, for sure, to stay far away, and that through this chus be'ezras Hashem, we should never need to experience this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, roitza la'soisei nar, like we said in the beginning, right, chas v'shalom, to bring a tragedy into a person's life, to soften them. We shouldn't need that, because we should already be living with this innocence, with this purity, with this soulfulness. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should protect us. We should only hear good news, be'ezras Hashem. And Ashreinu, what a privilege to learn Torah from this tzaddik and to share Torah from this tzaddik. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you.